The German shepherd collapsed at the emergency entrance, his body crumpling onto the sun-scorched concrete. His front paws, torn and bleeding, splayed out beneath him like broken tools of war. Blood pooled beneath raw pads, each breath labored and shallow, sending tremors through his mud-splattered coat. His tongue lolled from cracked jaws, dry from exhaustion and relentless heat. And yet his amber eyes remained locked, unwavering, on the ambulance doors. Inside, paramedics rushed, a stretcher through the entrance, unaware of the drama unfolding just feet away. Those outside stood frozen. Some lifted phones, instinctively capturing the surreal sight. This dog hadn't appeared from a nearby street or wandered in from a shady alley. He had chased that ambulance, through traffic, through 105-degree heat, through 15 kilometers of blistering asphalt, and no one could yet explain why. A security guard approached cautiously, baton drawn but hesitating. "Someone call animal control," he said, though even his voice faltered, because there was something different about this animal, something more than instinct or confusion. The shepherd summoned his last reserve of strength and dragged himself forward, leaving behind a trail of blood and purpose. A soft whimper escaped him, not aggressive, not desperate, but pleading. A message in a language only the heart could interpret. He was here for someone inside, someone who mattered more than anything, but who, not long ago, in a forgotten corner of Riverdale's Westfield Park, a homeless Vietnam veteran named Frank Holloway had shared a sandwich with this very dog. Duke wasn't just a pet. He was a retired military canine, rescued from death row. Together, they had found a fragile rhythm of survival. One veteran who had fought in tunnels, the other trained to sniff out explosives. In a world that had cast them both aside, they had become each other's last hope. Then, something went terribly wrong. Now, Frank lay unconscious inside the ambulance bay, the victim of a sudden, devastating stroke, and Duke, against every odd, had followed the ambulance, past intersections, across bridges, through alleys and city blocks, driven not by training, but by love, by memory, by the unbreakable bond forged between two souls who had been to war and back. This isn't a story about a dog chasing a vehicle. It's about what drives a being human or animal to chase something they love through pain, exhaustion, and fear. It's about loyalty that defies logic, connection that defies explanation, and the miracle that unfolds when devotion is the only compass left. This is the story of Duke, the dog who refused to be left behind. Let's continue the story. The sun had barely crested the skyline when Frank Holloway settled onto a splintered park bench in Westfield Park, his worn body sinking into the wood with a familiar groan. Even at this early hour, the Arizona heat hung in the air like a heavy coat, promising another unforgiving day. The park was mostly deserted, no children on the swings, no joggers pounding the pavement, just the kind of emptiness Frank had grown used to. Beside him, Duke sat upright, ears flicking, eyes alert. The German shepherd's thick coat shimmered under the harsh sun, already damp around the collar from the rising temperature. Despite the heat, his posture was disciplined, protective, as if guarding something sacred. Frank reached into a crinkled paper bag and pulled out a salad, courtesy of the Methodist Church's outreach van. Carefully, almost ceremoniously, he tore it in half. "Got us a feast today," he muttered, placing the larger portion on a makeshift plate and sliding it toward Duke. "Not your favorite, I know, but protein is protein." Duke waited for the nod before leaning forward to eat, It was a silent ritual, one they'd performed countless times since fate had pulled them together. Frank's voice, gravelly from age and years of unfiltered cigarettes, carried a mix of humor and weariness. Protein builds muscle, that's what the army said. Of course, they never mentioned how it tastes like drywall. The dog's tail swept a slow arc in the dust. Frank's hands, sun-darkened and calloused, shook slightly as he raised his own half of the sandwich. His fingernails were stained with earth, and the veins in his forearms stood like exposed roots. Atop his head, a tattered Vietnam veteran cap shaded a face furrowed by decades' lines, not just of age, but of memory. 2 years ago, Frank had owned a small home on the east side of Riverdale. A modest place, but it was his. Then came the heart attack, then the bills, then the foreclosure. The spiral had been fast and merciless. Now, home was a tarp by the creek when the weather held, or the veterans' shelter when they weren't turning people away. But Duke made it bearable. Duke made it home. The shepherd hadn't always been Frank's. Just 8 months ago, he'd been scheduled for euthanasia at the county shelter deemed too aggressive for civilian life. The scars on Duke's flank told the real story. 3 tours in Afghanistan, shrapnel injury, honorably discharged. What people mistook for aggression was vigilance. Military training didn't fade with a kennel gate. Frank had seen it in the dog's eyes, the same haunted look he once saw in his own mirror. So, he cashed in what little savings remained and adopted Duke 2 days before the dog's scheduled. Euthanasia, sometimes the only one who understands a broken soldier, is another broken soldier, he'd told the shelter director now. In the stillness of the park, that decision felt like salvation. Water break, soldier, Frank said, uncapping a battered bottle and pouring into a collapsible bowl. Duke lapped it gratefully, his chest heaving in the heat. Frank smiled. Wish I could give you a creek. Closest thing to that these days is this bowl and a prayer. He recapped the bottle and flexed his left hand. A strange tingling had settled. Into his fingers a dull buzz, like a limb waking up. He frowned but dismissed it. He'd slept awkwardly on the ground again, and at his age, new aches came with the morning like dew. He shifted his weight, trying to stretch it out, but then the tingling spread to his forearm. Frank blinked, momentarily dizzy. The sandwich felt heavier than it should, his grip unsure. He glanced at Duke, whose ears twitched at the sudden change. In his partner's breathing, "Just need a minute," Frank mumbled, though to whom, he wasn't sure. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, trying to shake it off. But the numbness was climbing, now shoulder, jaw, face. His vision blurred at the edges. The sky tilted. He tried to speak, Duke, but the word came out slurred, unfamiliar. He tasted metal. Panic flared. The sandwich slipped from his hand, falling in slow motion to the dusty ground. Duke's head snapped up. His eyes locked on Frank, confusion giving way to alarm. Frank clutched the edge of the bench, fingers digging into splintered wood. A sharp, electric pain surged through his chest, radiating outward like a grenade blast. His knees buckled. His breath became a task. "Help," he whispered, but the park was empty. Frank slumped sideways, his body crumpling like a discarded coat. Duke lunged forward, barking sharply. No response. He nudged Frank's arm, cold nose probing for movement. Nothing. A low, anxious whine rose from his throat, growing into insistent barking. His training kicked in. This wasn't confusion, this was a medical emergency. His handler was down. Duke barked again, then sprinted to the edge of the park, barking at the road. At the passing cars, 1, 2, nothing. He raced back to Frank, checked on him, then back to the street. A strategy formed in his mind. Signal, return, signal again. His barks grew louder, sharper, slicing through the thick summer air like sirens. Frank lay still, his chest barely rising, and Duke trained for war, rejected by society, rescued by. A man with nothing left now stood as the last line of defense between his handler and death. The sun climbed higher, heat shimmered off the sidewalk. Somewhere nearby, a life hung in balance, and one dog refused to let it fall. Duke's instincts ignited like a flare. As Frank slumped lifelessly on the park bench, the dog stood over him with the intensity of a soldier guarding his fallen commander. He barked again, sharp, piercing, urgent. When Frank didn't respond, he nudged the man's shoulder with his snout, harder this time. Still nothing. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This was the moment his training, long buried beneath civilian life, surged to the surface. He circled Frank once, checking for movement, breath, any sign of responsiveness. Then, decision made, he took off his paws, pounding the cracked pavement, scattering loose dust and fallen leaves. His body low, fast, focused, no wasted motion. He reached the edge of the park, eyes darting, ears scanning. A minivan sped past. He barked and lunged, but the vehicle didn't stop. A cyclist veered away from him, frowning in annoyance. Duke ran back to Frank, gave another quick check, no change, then sprinted out again, this time pushing further toward the sidewalk that bordered the street. He planted himself at the curb, barking furiously at each passing car. A red sedan swerved slightly, the driver muttering something behind the glass. Duke didn't flinch. He ran alongside it for a few seconds, then backpedaled, trying again. With the next vehicle, most ignored him, but Duke didn't give up. Each time he returned to Frank's side, his actions grew more frantic. He whined, nudged the man's face with his nose, then bolted out once more. He was running a circuit now, a pattern of hope. Each trip into the road was a gamble, but he didn't hesitate. A lesser dog might have given up, confused or frightened, but not Duke, not this soldier. 10 minutes passed, then, finally, a silver Buick slowed. Inside sat Martha and Gerald Wilkins, both in their early 70s. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, her purse in her lap. He had the cautious demeanor of a man who'd spent his life keeping things in order. They were headed to the pharmacy, discussing prescriptions and the heat, when Martha spotted the dog. "That shepherd's upset about something," she said, rolling down her window. Gerald immediately bristled. "Don't encourage strays, Martha. Might have rabies." But Martha wasn't listening. Her eyes had already tracked Duke's repeated back and forth, path from street to bench, from bark to collapse. "There's someone on that bench," she said sharply. Gerald stopped the car. Reluctantly, Gerald pulled over, grumbling as he fumbled for his phone. Martha stepped out cautiously, her eyes fixed on Duke. The dog stood in front of her, tense but not aggressive. His tail was still, ears forward. He let out a sharp bark, then turned and trotted toward Frank, glancing back once, as if to say, "Follow me." "Martha did, sir," she called as she approached the bench. "Sir, can you hear me?" Frank didn't move. His head had slumped further to the side, mouth slack, skin a shade paler than before. Duke stood beside him, eyes locked on Martha, urging her to act. "He's not responding." She called over her shoulder. "Gerald, call 911 now." Back at the car, Gerald had already connected with emergency services. "Yes, there's a man unconscious in the park. He's not moving. My wife thinks it could be a stroke or heart attack." He paused, then added, "There's a German shepherd with him." "Yes, no, he hasn't bitten anyone." Martha moved slowly, trying not to startle Duke as she approached the bench. The dog watched her every step but didn't growl or back away. He allowed her to get close, seeming to understand that she was trying to help. She reached Frank's wrist and pressed her fingers against it. "He has a pulse," she said quietly, "but he's not waking up." Gerald joined her, still on the phone with the dispatcher. "Yes, he's breathing. Eyes closed, unresponsive. Yes, we'll stay with him." Duke whined again, pawing lightly at Frank's knee, then sitting back on his haunches, ears down for the first time. It was as if he knew help was finally coming, but he wasn't done yet. His eyes moved constantly, scanning for danger, for opportunity, for the next thing he might need to do. 7 minutes passed, then the distant sound of sirens broke the heat-stilled air. Duke rose immediately, body tense with renewed energy. He stepped forward, alert and determined, as if ready to greet reinforcements. When the ambulance turned into the park entrance, the dog's tail gave a single, short wag acknowledging victory in the first part of his mission. Gerald waved them down, stepping aside as the paramedics jumped out. Tony Rodriguez and Dave Connor approached the scene quickly. Tony went straight to Frank, kneeling beside the bench to assess. Dave, however, stopped short, his eyes locked on the large, muscular shepherd, standing watch over the patient. "Nobody said anything about a dog," Dave muttered, halting just outside Duke's range. "Is he with the patient?" Tony asked without looking up. "The couple says yes," Dave replied. "Apparently he's the one who got their attention." Martha added, "He hasn't left his side. Tried to stop every car on the road to help his owner. I've never seen anything like it." Dave's jaw tightened. His fear of dogs wasn't a secret on the team. It came from a childhood mauling he never fully got past. And this dog, with his intense gaze and battle-scarred body, was not exactly the comforting kind. "Just keep him away while we work," Dave said, motioning to Gerald. Gerald tried to grab Duke's collar, but the shepherd sidestepped smoothly, returning to Frank's side and lying down beside him, as if to say, "I'll move when he does." Tony ran his checks swiftly. BP's low, pulse irregular, facial droop on the left. Classic stroke presentation. "We're in the golden hour, need to move." As they prepared to lift Frank, Duke rose again, circling the stretcher. His body language intensified, not aggressive, but anxious, unwilling to let the separation begin. "We need someone to restrain that dog before he attacks," Dave said, the old fear creeping into his voice. "He's not attacking," Martha snapped. "He's protecting." The tension grew thick. Everyone could feel it, the fear, the compassion, the urgency. In the midst of it all, Duke stood tall. His eyes never left Frank as the stretcher lifted, and as the ambulance doors closed, the shepherd let out a deep, mournful bark, then silence. A moment later, the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, tires screeching. Duke didn't hesitate. He ran after it. The interior of the ambulance rattled with urgency as Frank Holloway lay motionless on the gurney, a thin oxygen mask strapped to his face. The monitors beeped erratically, the numbers fluctuating in ways no medic liked to see. Tony Rodriguez knelt beside him, inserting an IV with practiced calm. BP's still dropping, he called toward the front. We're gonna need a clean run. Tell the ER to prep for stroke protocol. Dave Connor grunted in response, his hands tightening around the steering wheel. He glanced into the rearview mirror. Roger that. But his gaze caught something else in the mirror, a blur of tan and black. Sprinting down the middle of the street, Dave squinted. You've got to be kidding me. Behind them, Duke was running. Full sprint, his paws pounding the asphalt, his ears pinned back, his focus absolute. The shepherd's entire being was aimed at one thing, the flashing red and blue lights on the back of the ambulance. He wasn't barking, he wasn't flailing, he was pursuing. Dave's stomach tightened. He hadn't wanted to deal with the dog from the start. Even outside the park, when the shepherd had refused to let Frank be taken without him. Dave's instincts had screamed danger. The memory of a Rottweiler's teeth on his forearm, the sound of his own childhood screams, was buried just deep. Enough to still bleed when triggered. And now the dog was chasing him. Tony, Dave muttered, trying to sound calmer than he felt. That damn dog is still coming. He's chasing us. Tony didn't look up. We don't have time for detours, Dave. Frank's in trouble. Step on it. Dave pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine whined. The sirens screamed louder. They wove through intersections, slicing through red lights and swerving past honking cars. And yet, every time Dave looked in the mirror, Duke was still there. He dodged traffic with uncanny precision, barely slowing even when forced to leap. Over debris or veer around parked cars. His tongue hung from the side of his mouth, his chest heaving. But his pace never faltered. He's at 3 blocks and still going, Dave muttered under his breath. This is ridiculous. He's following Frank, Tony said, checking. Frank's pupils. You saw him back at the park. He hasn't left that man's side once. Because he's a stray with separation anxiety, Dave shot back. Or maybe he's just territorial. Tony shook his head. No, that dog's trained. Didn't you see the way he held position, the way he watched us work? That's not just some mutt. Dave gritted his teeth. Still not coming with us. Doesn't seem like he's asking for permission. At mile 1, Duke's breathing had grown labored. His body, more muscle than fat, wasn't built for long-distance running in the Arizona heat. The pads of his paws were already showing signs of stress, small tears, grit embedded in the soft tissue. But he didn't stop, not once. Dave watched. The dog close a bit of distance during a stoplight and swore under his breath. That's it, I'm pulling over. No time. Tony barked. We're heading straight to the stroke center. Every second counts. I'm telling you, he's gonna cause an accident. He'll get hit, or worse, cause someone else to crash. Just keep driving. He'll stop eventually. But Duke didn't stop. At mile 2, pedestrians began to notice. A woman outside a cafe lifted her phone, filming the German shepherd weaving between cars, his gaze locked forward. Another bystander shouted, "Yo, that dog's chasing the ambulance." And laughter followed until people realized the dog was bleeding. His paws were stained red now, each step leaving a faint mark on the pavement. At mile 3, Dave's frustration reached its peak. "I've had enough," he growled, swerving the ambulance to the curb. Tires screeched. The gurney inside rocked slightly, but Tony steadied it. "What the hell are you doing?" Tony shouted. "I'm going to scare it off before it kills itself. Dave slammed the driver's door and stepped into the street, the heat rising in waves from the asphalt. He spotted Duke closing in, tongue out, foam forming at the edge of his mouth. "Go on, get out of here," Dave shouted, clapping his hands, stomping the pavement. "Go home." Duke slowed to a trot, maintaining a safe distance, but his eyes never left the ambulance. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, chest heaving, ribs moving visibly beneath his fur. But determined, Dave took a step forward, more aggressively this time. Duke circled wide around him, and then, just like that, he ran right past, straight to the rear of the ambulance. Dave stood in, stunned, silence as Duke tried to nudge the back door with his nose inside. Frank stirred slightly. "Damn it," Dave muttered, turning back. "We don't have time for this." He slammed the door and jumped back into the driver's seat, glancing once more into the mirror as he peeled away from the curb. Duke stumbled briefly, then regained stride. His body was trembling now, every muscle overtaxed, but he kept running. "For miles," Dave whispered, "still going." Tony glanced toward the front. "He's not going to stop." "I know." The ambulance roared through the downtown corridor, sirens parting traffic like water. Duke trailed just far enough behind to stay out of danger, but close enough to be visible. He ducked between cars, jumped onto curbs, and ignored horns and shouts. People started filming, uploading, sharing. A German shepherd chasing. An ambulance wasn't just a spectacle anymore. It was a story of something deeper than instinct, deeper than training, something people couldn't quite explain. Dave finally said it aloud. "This dog's chasing hope." Mile 5 came and went. Duke was still running. Will he give up? No one knew, but everyone watching hoped the answer was no. The Arizona sun was now merciless, suspended in the sky like a heat lamp aimed directly at the city of Riverdale. Pavement shimmered in the distance, warping the edges of buildings and cars into liquid outlines. The temperature had climbed past 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and even the locals, those born into this heat, stayed indoors. But Duke was still running by mile 6. The pads of his paws were torn, the blood now more visible, dark splotches trailing behind him, fading quickly into the boiling pavement. Every step left a tiny red signature, a reminder of the price he was paying. His chest rose and fell in harsh gasps. His tongue hung long and dry, white foam collecting at the corners, and still his eyes never left the ambulance. Inside the vehicle, Dave kept checking the rearview mirror. "This is insane," he muttered, sweat soaking through his uniform shirt. Despite the air conditioning, Tony glanced up from Frank's vitals. Still with us, Dave said, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. "Maybe we should stop." Tony offered quietly, Dave's hands clenched on the wheel. "We can't take animals in the rig. You know the policy." "You're not wrong," Tony said, checking Frank's heart monitor, "but he's not exactly a stray." Dave slammed his palm against the steering wheel. "Protocol is protocol," Tony didn't argue, but his silence carried more weight than any words. Outside, Duke pushed on at the edge of the business district. The shepherd struggled with a new obstacle, a long stretch of sun-baked concrete overpass with no shade, no trees, no grass, just heat reflecting upward like a furnace from the ground itself. His pace slowed. He limped now, just slightly, shifting weight to minimize pressure on his injured pads. His legs trembled, but he didn't stop. A crowd had begun to form online. People in shops and offices posted videos. German Shepherd chasing an ambulance. Down 5th Street. Who's this dog? Riverdale hero. Somebody help this pup. Within the hour, the hashtag chasing hope began to trend locally. At a corner near the courthouse, Melissa Carpenter stepped out for lunch, sipping iced coffee and checking her notifications. The heat nearly sent her back inside till a sudden movement caught her eye. She turned and saw him. The dog. He looked like something out of a war movie. Matted fur, bleeding paws, eyes burning with purpose. He barely noticed the people, the traffic, or the honking horns. He was locked on the vehicle ahead. Instinct kicked in. Melissa uncapped her water bottle and ran forward, cutting into Duke's path. "Hey boy," she called gently, crouching low, hand extended. "Quick drink." Duke hesitated. His body was shaking now, like an overworked engine on its final fumes. But the water. He paused, dropped his head, and began to lap desperately from her cupped hands. Melissa poured more. His tail gave one quick flick. "That's it," she murmured. "You're doing good." A second later, he was gone, again recharged, just enough to push forward. Melissa blinked at the empty space he'd left behind, then quickly snapped a photo and posted it. Just, "Gave this dog water. He's chasing an ambulance. Someone please find out what's going on." Hashtag Riverdale hero. The post spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, the ambulance weaved through downtown intersections, nearing the Riverdale Memorial Hospital turnoff. "He's still back there," Dave said, watching in disbelief. Tony looked up again. "Frank's pulse is weaker." Dave slammed the accelerator. 2 more blocks. At mile 7, Duke's vision blurred at the edges. His body begged him to stop. But the training kicked in, again, not the kind from obedient school, but the kind burned into the bone. He remembered the handlers, the missions, the long marches through desert terrain, the smell of blood, the pulse of fear in the air. And always, the command, protect your partner. Stay with your human. He wouldn't fail. More cars pulled over to record the chase. Drivers leaned out of their windows. "Somebody give that dog a ride." A teenager shouted from a pickup. Then, almost like divine timing, a red truck swerved into view at the intersection ahead. The driver, a construction worker named Mike, slowed as Duke stumbled into the crosswalk. "Whoa, buddy," Mike muttered, braking hard. "You following that ambulance?" Duke stopped, panting hard, looking up at the man with glazed eyes. Mike opened the door and slapped the seat. "Hop in, soldier." Duke hesitated. Then, with a final burst of energy, he leaped into the truck. Bed and collapsed, sides heaving. Mike floored it, catching up with the ambulance just as it hit the final turn for the hospital. He honked twice, then rolled down his window to yell, "Got your tail, he's in the back." Dave looked over in disbelief, saw the dog sprawled in the truck bed, and muttered, "This can't be real." Mike peeled away at the next turn, slowing near the emergency entrance. Duke, somehow understanding the mission wasn't over, leaped from the truck and staggered after the ambulance again. Now just a few hundred feet from the hospital doors, Dave pulled up to the ER bay, sirens winding down. "Let's move," Tony shouted, already opening the back doors as Frank was rushed. Inside, Duke limped around the corner, blood dripping from every step. The hospital was in sight, so was the finish line, but could he make it? The road curved sharply as the ambulance began its final approach to Riverdale Memorial Hospital. Ahead lay the riverside bridge, a narrow, two-lane stretch of concrete that arched over the lazy, brown-green river dividing the city. The bridge had no pedestrian walkway, no shoulder, just open traffic lanes and a short guardrail. Duke reached the base of the bridge seconds after the ambulance thundered across. He paused, body trembling, paws bleeding onto the hot pavement. His ears flicked, nose high, catching the familiar scent of Frank fading, but still there. Then he looked up. The bridge was a death trap. Cars moved too fast, no room to run. He stood for just one heartbeat more, calculating, then turned sharply and bolted down the embankment toward the water. The air was thick with heat, buzzing with cicadas. The river sloshed lazily beneath the bridge, shallow but slow. Without hesitation, Duke plunged in. The water hit his overheated body like a shock startling, but welcome. His legs paddled furiously, instinct driving every movement. His head stayed above the surface, nose pointed toward the far bank. He had no room for fear, no room for exhaustion. Only the memory of Frank's scent, the echo of the ambulance siren, and a single command pulsing in his mind. Don't lose him. His muscles screamed, his paws, already shredded, kicked through water now filled with silt and debris. But he swam on the bridge above. Cars passed, unaware of the mission unfolding beneath them. Duke reached the far side with a final surge, claws scrabbling against muddy earth. He pulled himself up the embankment, slipping twice, catching traction the third time. His body was soaked, coated in river grime. But his eyes, they still burned with purpose. He stumbled toward the road just as a red pickup truck approached. From a side street, the driver, a burly man in a reflective vest, tapped the brakes and squinted through the windshield. What in the... Mike had been hauling lumber all morning. His clothes were soaked with sweat, but the moment he saw the dripping German shepherd limping from the riverbank toward the road, he knew something wasn't normal. He pulled over. Fast. The dog was soaked, filthy, clearly injured, but moving like he had somewhere to be. Mike opened the window. "Hey, buddy, where are you headed?" Duke looked at the truck, then the road ahead, where the ambulance had vanished just minutes earlier. His body sagged, but his eyes remained locked forward. Mike's heart clenched. "All right," he muttered, climbing out. "Let's get you a ride." He patted the edge of the truck bed. "Come on up. You've earned it." Duke hesitated, only briefly, before springing up less gracefully than he might have once. But with undeniable resolve, Mike got back in the driver's seat, flipped on his hazards, and pulled out. "Let's catch your ride, soldier." A few minutes later, the red truck caught up to the ambulance at a stoplight near the hospital entrance. Mike honked twice and pointed. Dave, glancing in his side mirror, caught sight of the mud-covered shepherd, standing in the truck bed, deers alert, gaze burning through the glass. He cursed under his breath. "That dog." Tony looked up. "He made it." Dave nodded slowly. "He swam the damn river, jumped into a stranger's truck." "You believe that?" Tony smiled grimly. "I do now." The light turned green. Mike peeled off just as the ambulance made its final turn toward the emergency entrance. Duke, sensing his moment, shifted his weight. As Mike slowed near the curb, Duke leapt back onto the road. His legs buckled briefly, but he caught himself. He could barely breathe, barely walk. But he was close. So close, the hospital rose ahead, glass doors gleaming, white walls shimmering in the heat. It was unfamiliar, sterile, to clean, but Frank was inside. He knew it. So Duke ran. Every step was agony. But he ran, inside the ambulance. Tony watched Frank's vitals spike. He's reacting, Tony muttered. Something's changing, right now. Dave looked back, eyes flicking to the heart monitor, then to the rear window, and then he saw him. The dog, sprinting after the ambulance, his coat filthy, his paws bleeding, his stride uneven, but his those eyes burned brighter than anything Dave had ever seen. Not rage, not fear, but love, unbreakable, irrational, beautiful love. Dave's throat tightened. They reached the emergency bay. Nurses poured out. Doors flew open. The gurney rolled. Tony jumped down first. Barking orders. Frank was rushed inside, and just seconds later, Duke stumbled into the ambulance bay. His legs gave out. He collapsed in a heap, tongue out, sides heaving, blood pooling under his paws. But his eyes, they stayed fixed on the doors Frank had passed through. The mission wasn't over, not yet. The automatic doors of Riverdale Memorial's emergency entrance hissed open and closed as the trauma team wheeled Frank Holloway through. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered across polished tiles and sterile white walls. The air was sharp with antiseptic and urgency. Paramedics shouted vitals. Nurses hustled with purpose. It was just another critical intake in a hospital that saw dozens a day. But outside, something extraordinary was happening. Duke stumbled forward on raw, trembling legs. His once powerful gait had deteriorated into a desperate hobble each step, sending fresh rivulets of blood trailing behind him. His paws, torn to the flesh, left a ghostly trail red on white tile. The automatic doors sensed his presence and opened. For a moment, he hesitated, his nose catching 1,000 unfamiliar scents, his instincts resisting the cold, artificial air. But then he took a step, and then another. Then he collapsed. His body gave out fully this time, no more strength left to pull from. His frame hit the cool lobby floor with a soft, heart-breaking thud, his head rolling to the side as his eyes remained fixed still on the hallway where Frank had vanished. Whoa, what the exclamation came from Roy Wilkins, the hospital security guard on duty, a large man with a military past and the demeanor to match. Roy had seen a lot in his years behind that desk, but nothing like this. He rushed forward, crouching beside the mud-caked German shepherd, now lying in a puddle of blood and exhaustion. Jesus, he muttered, his tough voice cracking with something between concern and awe. You're in rough shape, aren't you, boy? From behind him came another voice, Dave, still holding the patient intake forms, frozen in place. That's him, Dave said, slowly stepping into the lobby. That's the dog. He followed us the whole way. Roy looked up in disbelief. From where? Westfield Park, Dave replied, eyes never leaving the collapsed figure on the ground. 15 kilometers. No brakes, no help, just ran. Swam a river, caught a truck, then ran again. Roy's eyebrows lifted high. You're telling me this animal chased an ambulance for 9 miles? Dave nodded slowly. Didn't stop. We tried everything. A few visitors in the waiting room turned to look. A nurse stepped out from behind the counter, phone already in hand. He came in through the doors. Someone whispered, "Is that blood? He's hurt somebody, help him." The air shifted. The urgency of the had suddenly split between the man on the gurney and the dog who refused to be left behind. Duke lay still, panting shallowly, tongue slipping from his mouth, His chest rose and fell in rapid bursts, muscles twitching from exhaustion and pain. But his eyes, they never moved from that hallway. As if, by sheer will, he could still protect the one person who had ever truly seen him. Dave took a step closer, then paused. Something twisted inside him, not fear, but something else, a weight. He's all that man had, Dave murmured, more to himself than to Roy. Owner, Roy asked. Dave nodded. Vietnam vet, stroke patient, no emergency contacts. When he regained consciousness, first thing he said was my dog. Roy looked back down at Duke, his expression softening. He made sure he got here. Didn't matter what it cost. By now, a small crowd had gathered in the lobby. Visitors, staff, even a few off-duty nurses who had come in early for their shifts. All watched as the dog struggled to breathe, lying like a fallen warrior at the gates of battle. A nurse knelt beside Roy, her training overriding protocol. He's severely dehydrated, she said, lifting Duke's lip to check his gums. His paws are shredded. He needs help. He needs a vet, another nurse added. Call animal control. He needs his person, Roy countered firmly. Behind them, the head receptionist fumbled for the intercom. Security to main lobby. We have a dog situation. No one quite knew what to do, security protocols said. Animals weren't allowed. Ethics said something else entirely. Duke stirred. The mention of Frank's name seemed to ripple through the room, unspoken but powerful. Caller, Dave said suddenly. Tell them the dog followed the stroke patient. Tell them he's not just some stray. One of the nurses nodded and hurried off. Roy leaned in closer, speaking softly. You did good, soldier. You got him here. Duke made a sounder half whimper. Half sign, closed his eyes. Not unconscious, just trusting. A volunteer returned with a blanket and knelt beside Duke. Another brought a bowl of water, setting it gently near his head. He sniffed, then licked slowly, cautiously. The blood trail stretched behind him, a silent testament to the distance traveled, the pain endured, and the bond that refused to be broken. People began to film, not out of spectacle, but reverence. Dog who chased an ambulance wasn't a headline. It was a promise, and Duke had kept it. What is that dog doing inside my lobby? The voice rang sharp and cold, slicing through the hum of the ER like a scalpel. Patricia Winters, hospital administrator for Riverdale Memorial, marched into the reception area with her heels clicking. On the polished floor and a clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. Her eyes narrowed as she caught sight of the battered German shepherd lying in a half-dried pool of blood. Surrounded by staff and visitors alike, Roy stood beside the dog, arms folded across his chest. He followed a patient in-stroke victim. From Westfield Park, the dog ran after the ambulance. This is a hospital, not a kennel, Patricia snapped. I don't care how touching the story is. He's injured, unvaccinated, and bleeding on my floors. He's also the only thing that man's got, Roy said firmly. Emotion doesn't trump liability, Patricia countered. Call animal control. Have them remove the animal gently, if possible. Dave, who had been silently observing from the corner, stepped forward. Ma'am, I was the one driving the ambulance. That dog ran 15 kilometers through traffic and over a bridge, then swam a river to stay with his partner. That's not a stray, that's a soldier. Patricia turned to him, unfazed. I understand what you're saying, but that doesn't change protocol. Before the argument could escalate further, A soft voice cut in from the side. "Maybe we can assess him." Nurse Emma Chen stepped forward, a young but sharp nurse with a background in canine therapy. Beside her stood Lisa Thornton, a licensed social worker and trauma counselor. Emma knelt beside Duke, who barely lifted his head at her approach. His breathing was shallow but steady. "I've worked with service animals before," Emma said gently. "There are specific cues we can use. If he's trained, he'll respond. If not, you'll have your answer." Patricia crossed her arms. "You have 5 minutes." Emma nodded, then leaned in close. "Hi there," she said softly. "You've had a big day, haven't you?" Duke blinked once. His eyes tracked her slowly. "Okay," Emma said, shifting her tone slightly, letting her voice take on the crisp, assertive cadence of a military handler. "Sit." Duke didn't move. Emma leaned back. "He may be too exhausted. Stand," she said next, with sharper authority. Duke stirred. With effort, his paws slid beneath him, and he rose unsteady. But upright, the small crowd murmured. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Heel Duke took one step to her side. Lisa gasped. "That's not random, that's conditioning." Emma turned to Patricia. "He's a trained service animal." Probably exploratory. Duke, still swaying on his feet, looked toward the ER doors. Emma gave one final cue. "Target." The shepherd moved, nose down, trailing the last scent path Frank had left behind. When he reached the double doors that led to the restricted trauma wing, he sat and waited. The entire lobby was silent. Patricia's jaw tensed. Roy spoke first. "I don't think we're dealing with a stray, ma'am." Lisa added, "If we send him to animal control, he'll be separated from the only person he responds to. That could compromise the patient's recovery." Patricia sighed sharply, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Fine, he gets 30 minutes in the employee break room. No further, and if animal control arrives first, he goes." Roy opened his mouth to protest, but Patricia held up a finger. "Don't push it." Emma stepped toward Duke, placing a gentle hand on his back. "You hear that, buddy? You've got 30 minutes. Let's make them count." With the help of 2 techs, they gently guided Duke into the staff break room and laid down towels and a water bowl. A young intern brought gauze and antiseptic to tend to his paws. Duke didn't resist. He lay calmly, eyes watching the hallway as if waiting for the moment Frank would return. As the staff dispersed, murmuring in disbelief, Lisa remained at Duke's side, filing a mental report. The emotional impact of that chase. "It's going to hit the staff hard," she said quietly to Emma. Emma nodded, and the public there, already videos going viral. Back at the nurse's station, Roy refreshed his feed. His phone lit up with dozens of clips. The dog crossing the bridge, leaping from the truck, collapsing in the lobby. The top comment read, "This dog didn't chase an ambulance. He chased a promise." The image of Duke lying by the door of the trauma wing began circulating among staff. Tagged #chasing hope inside the ER. Frank Holloway was undergoing a critical procedure, a TPA injection, to dissolve the clot that threatened his brain. His condition was stable, but uncertain. And in the staff lounge, his dog waited. 30 minutes. That was the window. 30 minutes to prove that this wasn't just a heartwarming story. It was something deeper, a connection forged in fire. And the only question left: would Duke be allowed to stay? Would Frank wake up? Or would both be left behind? Inside the trauma wing, The medical team moved with controlled urgency. Frank Holloway's CT scan revealed a large ischemic stroke. An artery in his brain had been blocked, cutting off oxygen to critical regions. His left side was nearly paralyzed. Time was slipping through their fingers. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood over the scans, jaw set. He's still within the treatment window. We go for TPA immediately. A nurse nodded, already prepping the IV line. Notify OR, Sarah added. If the TPA doesn't break up the clot, we'll need to pull it manually. Outside the operating suite, the hallway buzzed with activity. But just 2 doors down, in the small, windowless employee break room, a different kind of silence reigned. Duke lay on a folded hospital blanket, legs curled beneath him, chest rising, and falling in slow, shallow breaths. A bowl of water sat untouched beside him. A fresh sandwich from the cafeteria turkey, his favorite trusted, unbothered, on a paper plate. But Duke didn't move. His ears flicked occasionally at loud voices, or sudden beeps in the hallway, but his gaze stayed fixed on the door, unwavering. It wasn't hunger or pain keeping him still. It was waiting. His eyes, glassy, rimmed with fatigues, seemed to understand that something was happening, that Frank was near, that he hadn't yet returned. Every so often, the dog's nose twitched, scenting the air, searching for the faint trail left by his partner. Nurse Emma stopped by briefly to check on him. Still nothing, she whispered, crouching beside him. Duke didn't respond. Emma placed a hand on his head, brushing gently behind his ears. I know, he's in surgery. You just rest, okay? But Duke wouldn't close his eyes. In the operating room, Frank's vitals fluctuated. The TPA had been administered, but the clot was stubborn partial response. Not complete. Get neuro on standby, Dr. Mitchell said. We're going in. The surgical team moved fast. Frank's chest rose and fell under anesthesia, his life hanging on the edge of a decision made only minutes earlier. Meanwhile, back in the break room, Duke slowly stood. He moved to the door and pressed his nose against the crack. He poured it lightly. The hallway beyond was quiet for a moment. Then someone opened it. A distracted intern entered, startled to find the dog standing, alert. Oh, sorry, buddy, just grabbing my badge. Duke slipped past him like a shadow. The intern called after him, but the dog was already moving silently through the corridor, ignoring strange scents, voices, carts. Alarms. He followed instinct, he followed memory, and most of all, he followed scent, through the halls around the corner, past the ICU. Duke reached the trauma doors and paused. A nurse nearly collided with him. Hey, you can't be wait. Is that the dog? He moved past her before she could finish. At the end of the hallway, a set of double doors opened as a surgical assistant exited the OR. Duke slipped through in the same moment. Unseen by most, inside, monitors beeped steadily. Frank lay under soft lighting, draped in sterile sheets. His face was pale, lips dry, the left side of his mouth slack from paralysis. Tubes snaked from his arms. Machines tracked every beat and breath. Duke crept forward. No one stopped him. Perhaps it was luck. Perhaps it was fate. He reached the side of the hospital bed and laid his head gently on the mattress, just near Frank's hand. Nothing moved. Then slowly, barely visible, the heart monitor jumped. One beat, then another. Nurse Emma, returning from another room, caught the change on the central vitals screen and frowned. That's odd. His heart rate just stabilized a bit. Lisa looked up. Could be meds kicking in. Could be. Emma murmured in the room. Duke didn't move. He simply breathed, watched, waited then, for the first time in hours. Frank's fingers twitched just slightly, enough for Duke's ears to lift. The monitor beeped again, more regular this time. Not perfect, but stronger, as if something shifted. Duke closed his eyes for the first time since the chase began, and laid still beside the man who had once saved him from a death sentence, whom he had now followed to the edge of life itself. Outside the room, staff began to whisper. Did you see the monitor jump when the dog entered? I swear his BP leveled when the dog laid down. Are they connected somehow? No one could explain it, but no one doubted it either. Frank Holloway was still unconscious, but Duke was beside him, and together they had survived. Inside ICU room, for the hum of machines formed a strange kind of harmony, the soft beeping of a heart monitor, the rhythmic hiss of assisted breathing, and the gentle whir of cooling fans that stirred the sterile air. Beneath the white sheets, Frank Holloway lay still, grizzled face slack, his body recovering from the traumatic impact of a stroke and hours of surgery. His bedside, Duke remained motionless. His head rested gently beside Frank's hand. His breathing was slow but steady, each exhale syncing eerily with the cardiac monitor. A nurse watching from the hallway furrowed her brow. Vitals are stabilizing, she murmured, but look at the pattern. Nurse Emma stepped beside her, eyes flicking to the screen. Heart rate 76 BPM, blood pressure leveling, respiration.com unlabored, brainwave activity subtle but rising. That's not from medication, Emma whispered. Lisa, the social worker, joined them, arms folded. It's him, the dog. In the observation room behind the ICU glass, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had performed the clot retrieval just hours before, leaned in. We weren't expecting this level of neurological response, especially not this soon. Duke stirred just slightly. His nose twitched, and he shifted closer to Frank, his body now touching the edge of the bed. That's when it happened. The EG monitor lit up with increased activity. Slow wave patterns characteristic of deeper unconsciousness began shifting. Upward, a spark, then another, then Frank's fingers moved again, this time with more intent. A small twitch of the shoulder, then a sound, a low, throaty hum. Not words, but not silence either. He's trying to speak, one of the nurses gasped. The room froze. A tech rushed to record the vitals in real time. All indicators just jumped. HR, EEG, everything. Duke didn't move, but his eyes opened, ears alert. Emma stepped forward into the room. Frank, she asked softly, can you hear me? There was no answer, but Frank's eyelids fluttered just for a second, a whisper of life. Emma looked back at the others, voice trembling. He's coming back. In that moment, the ICU door opened, and a tall man in a tan uniform stepped through. His name tag read, Michael Townsend. He was a park ranger from Riverdale National and had come to speak with hospital admin about the unusual dog story making the rounds online. But when he saw the name on the patient's chart, he froze. Frank Holloway, he said aloud. Emma turned. Do you know him? Michael's face had gone pale. Not personally, but I know his story. Lisa stepped forward. Go on. Michael's voice lowered. 32 years ago, my dad was in a house fire. Got caught in a structural collapse on the east side. They said a neighbor pulled him out right before the roof came down. Saved his life. The man refused recognition. Didn't want a medal. Just walked away. He nodded toward the bed. That was Frank Holloway. The staff went quiet. Michael continued, eyes fixed on the graying man lying in the bed. I only found out his name last year when my dad before he passed told me. He said, if you ever meet Frank, you thank him. He gave me more time than I deserved. Nurse Emma swallowed hard. You're saying the man who saved your father's life is the same one lying in that bed right now? Michael nodded. Slowly, looks like he's still saving people, even from a hospital bed. His eyes moved to Duke, and he's not alone. Behind the glass, Patricia Winters, who had arrived just in time to hear the story, stood stunned. She looked at the monitors, then at Duke, then back at Frank. All her arguments, protocols, liabilities, legal fears suddenly felt small. Lisa turned to her. This isn't just about a dog, Patricia. Emma added, this is about connection, one that can't be written into policy. Patricia said nothing for a long moment. Then she exhaled. Double quotes, fine, he stays. A wave of quiet relief moved through the hallway. Emma stepped back inside the room, crouched next to Duke, and gently ran a hand down his back. You did it, she whispered. Duke didn't react. Not visibly, but the monitor kept its steady rhythm. Connection wasn't just emotional, it was biological, energetic, spiritual. Whatever force had guided Duke across highways, rivers, heat, and fear was now healing the man who once saved him. Across the hospital, more staff gathered outside the ICU window. Some placed their palms against the glass. Others simply watched in awe. Someone whispered, he chased that ambulance for 15 kilometers, and now he's the one pulling him back. News vans began arriving outside. Phones buzzed with headlines. The hashtag Chasing Hope had crossed 1 million views. But inside room 4, there were no cameras, no speeches, just a dog, a man, and a heartbeat. Together, still fighting, still here, still connected. The night settled over Riverdale Memorial like a quiet prayer. The lights dimmed in the ICU hallway, and most visitors had gone home. But inside room 4, time seemed to hold its breath. Frank Holloway remained unconscious, his body fighting to reclaim what the stroke had tried to steal. Machines hummed softly beside him, measuring each fragile step toward recovery, and at his side, still silent, unmovable, lay Duke. His head rested on the mattress, his ears occasionally twitching at the sounds of the hospital, but his body remained utterly still. He hadn't eaten, barely drank. He was waiting, not because he was told to, but because he knew. Frank was still in there. Nurse Emma returned once more. Stepping softly into the room, she placed a hand on Duke's back, feeling the slow, tired rise of his breath. You're not going anywhere, are you? She whispered. He didn't answer, of course, but in the next second, Frank did. A faint murmur, just a breath of sound. Emma turned sharply toward the bed. Frank's lips parted. A whisper, Duke. Duke's ears perked up. Emma's eyes filled. Instantly with tears, she rushed to the door. Get Dr. Mitchell. He's responsive. Inside the room, Frank's fingers moved again, this time not twitching, but searching, feeling. Duke stood, shaky but determined, and pressed his snout gently into Frank's palm. It was small, barely a moment, but it was enough. In that connection, wordless, ancient, unbreakable, was the beginning of something new. Healing, hope, a promise fulfilled, and beyond the hospital walls. In homes across the country, people watched Duke's story unfold. A story of loyalty that defied logic, of survival that rewrote odds. But this was no ending, just a beginning, because while Frank had opened his eyes, the real journey was only starting, and Duke, he was still watching, still waiting, still ready, because when you love someone enough to chase them through fire, distance and pain, you don't stop at the hospital door. You go with them wherever the road leads next.